Hello everyone, and welcome back to another mysterious tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat tonight. Before we dive into this intriguing story, I'd love to know where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment below because I genuinely enjoy connecting with you all. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another thrilling mystery from this channel. Tonight's story is something truly special. Imagine this. A wealthy businessman walks out of his mansion on a perfectly ordinary Saturday afternoon and simply vanishes into thin air. No trace, no clues, nothing. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. The answer to his disappearance is hiding in the most unexpected place you could ever imagine. The kind of place where everyone's looking, but nobody's actually seeing. Intrigued? You should be. So settle in, get comfortable, maybe grab a warm drink, and let me take you on a journey into one of the most brilliantly crafted mysteries you'll ever hear. This is a story about deception, intelligence, and the art of hiding in plain sight. It was a chilly autumn evening when I found myself sitting in Detective Marcus Holloway's modest apartment on the east side of the city. The apartment was located in one of those older buildings with character, the kind with creaky wooden floors and tall windows that overlooked the bustling street below. Marcus was known throughout the precinct as a man of sharp instinct and even sharper wit. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went. Officers would whisper about his legendary cases, the seemingly impossible puzzles he'd solved with nothing more than careful thought and logical deduction. His apartment reflected his personality perfectly, everything arranged with military precision, books lined up by height on mahogany shelves, case files stacked in perfect chronological order on his desk, even his collection of vintage detective novels organized by publication date. The living room where we sat was sparse but comfortable, with two leather armchairs positioned at exact angles to face each other, a small coffee table between them, and a reading lamp that cast a warm, amber glow across the room. We were expecting his old colleague, Lieutenant Sarah Chin from the downtown precinct, to join us for coffee and what Marcus called his weekly case review session. These sessions had become something of a tradition over the past few years. Every Tuesday evening, if their schedules allowed, the three of us would gather to discuss ongoing investigations, share insights, and sometimes just enjoy each other's company away from the pressures of police work. Marcus had just finished adjusting the coffee cups on the small table between us, making sure each handle pointed in exactly the same direction, all facing precisely northeast. He'd even wiped down the coffee pot twice with a clean cloth, muttering something about fingerprints ruining the aesthetic, and how presentation mattered even in the smallest details of life. I couldn't help but smile at his quirks. After knowing him for nearly a decade, I'd grown accustomed to his meticulous nature, though it still amused me how he could spend 5 minutes arranging cups while a conversation waited. The coffee was brewing in the kitchen, filling the entire apartment with that rich, comforting aroma that somehow made everything feel safer and more civilized. Marcus had also prepared his signature hot chocolate in a small copper pot, a recipe he'd learned during a case that took him to Belgium years ago. He insisted it was far superior to what he called the bitter American coffee tradition, though he kept a pot of strong coffee brewing out of courtesy for his guests. A sharp knock echoed from downstairs. 3 quick raps followed by 2 slower ones. Sarah's signature knock that she'd adopted years ago, so her friends would always know it was her. Within moments, we heard her footsteps on the stairs, and she walked in with her usual energetic stride, bringing with her a gust of cold evening air and the faint scent of the city streets. "Hey guys, sorry if I'm running behind," she said, tossing her jacket over the back of a chair and running a hand through her short dark hair. "Truth is, I just spent 2 hours with Detective Rodriguez. He's the lead on the Whitmore case. You heard about it?" My ears perked up immediately. For the past week, every news channel and newspaper in the country had been obsessed with the mysterious disappearance of Jonathan Whitmore, the senior partner at Whitmore and Associates, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country. The story had everything the media loved: wealth, mystery, and unanswered questions. Last Saturday, he walked out of his sprawling estate in the suburbs and hadn't been seen since. The case had captured the public's imagination in a way that few missing person cases ever did, spawning countless theories on social media and dominating the 24-hour news cycle. Jonathan Whitmore wasn't just any businessman. He was a fixture in financial circles, a man whose investment advice was sought by politicians and celebrities alike. His firm managed billions in assets, and his personal fortune was estimated somewhere in the hundreds of millions. He'd built his reputation on being conservative, trustworthy, and almost boringly reliable. The idea that such a man could simply vanish was both thrilling and terrifying to the public. I turned to Sarah and said, "You'd think in this day and age, with cameras everywhere and facial recognition technology, it would be nearly impossible for someone to just disappear like that. I mean, we live in a surveillance state, practically. Every street corner has a camera. Every phone is a tracking device. Every transaction leaves a digital footprint. How does someone, especially someone as recognizable as Whitmore, just vanish?" Marcus shifted in his seat, moving a coaster exactly 1 inch to the left so it aligned perfectly with the edge of the table, and said with that precise tone he always used, the one that made you feel like a student being gently corrected by a professor, "Be specific, my friend. What exactly do you mean by disappear? What category of disappearance are we discussing here? The word disappear is far too vague for any meaningful analysis." I laughed, though I should have known better than to use imprecise language around Marcus. "Wait, disappearances have categories now. You've got them filed and labeled like your book collection?" Sarah smiled and settled into the other armchair, clearly enjoying the familiar dynamic between Marcus and me. But Marcus looked completely serious, his gray eyes focused and analytical. "Of course they do," he said. Any phenomenon, when studied carefully, reveals patterns and categories. Disappearances fall into three distinct types. First, and most common, the voluntary disappearance. Someone chooses to walk away from their life for any number of reasons. Debt, scandal, a desire to start over, escape from danger, or simply the wish to be free from their current existence. These cases usually resolve themselves eventually, either because the person returns or because they're discovered living under a new identity somewhere. He paused to pour himself a small cup of hot chocolate, the rich dark liquid steaming in the cool apartment air. Second, he continued, the genuine loss of memory case, which people claim all the time in movies and novels, but is actually quite rare in reality. True amnesia of the type that would prevent someone from knowing their own identity is extraordinarily uncommon and usually results from severe head trauma. Most alleged amnesia cases are either fraudulent or involve much more complex psychological conditions. Third, Marcus said, his voice taking on a slightly darker tone, murder followed by a more or less successful concealment of the body. This is perhaps the most challenging category because it involves an active adversary, someone working to ensure the disappeared person is never found. Now, when you say impossible, which category are you referring to? Or do you claim all three are impossible in modern society? I thought about it for a moment, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup in lazy spirals. Well, all three really, I suppose. I mean, if you voluntarily disappear, you might successfully hide for a while, but you still need to exist somewhere. You need food, shelter, money. Eventually you have to interact with systems that track people. And you might lose your memory, but someone's bound to recognize you, especially if you're a well-known figure like Whitmore. His face has been on the cover of Financial Times magazine. Somebody somewhere is going to recognize him if he's wandering around confused. I continued, warming to my argument. Bodies can't just vanish into nothing, either. They always turn up eventually, hidden in warehouses, or buried in remote locations, or weighted down in lakes. Modern forensics are incredible. We have cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis. And as for running away intentionally, with all our technology today, airports are monitored, train stations have cameras, border crossings are tracked with biometric data. A fugitive is up against the entire modern surveillance system. Every facial recognition database, every license plate reader, every credit card transaction. You can't just disappear anymore. The infrastructure of modern society won't allow it. Marcus leaned back in his chair, that knowing look in his eyes, the expression he got when he was about to make a point he'd clearly been waiting to make. My friend, he said, you're making one critical error. You're not accounting for the possibility that someone who's decided to disappear, or to make someone else disappear, might actually be intelligent. Highly intelligent. You're assuming average criminality, average planning, average execution. But what if we're dealing with someone exceptional? He set down his cup with deliberate care. They might approach it methodically, with careful planning and attention to every detail. They might spend months or even years preparing. They might study the very systems you're describing and find the gaps, the blind spots, the weaknesses that always exist in any human-created system. They might understand psychology well enough to know what investigators will assume and use those assumptions against them. If someone truly brilliant decided to disappear, and they approached it with the same rigor that an engineer approaches designing a bridge, I don't see why they couldn't successfully evade detection indefinitely. Sarah grinned and winked at me, clearly enjoying the theoretical discussion. But not you though, right, Marcus? They couldn't evade you? Even a brilliant criminal mastermind would eventually slip up, and you'd catch them? Marcus made a half-hearted attempt to look modest, which failed completely as it always did. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. Well, anyone can be evaded if they make mistakes or if they're not paying attention. I'm hardly infallible. But I do tend to approach these problems with a certain scientific precision, a mathematical logic that seems to be lacking in many modern investigations. Too many detectives today rely entirely on technology and forensics. They've forgotten how to actually think through a problem. He leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled together in that characteristic gesture. They collect evidence without understanding it. They see trees, but miss the forest. They focus on what's visible and physical, and ignore what's psychological and logical. A good investigation requires both, but if I had to choose one, I'd choose logic over evidence every time. Evidence can be manufactured, planted, misinterpreted. But logic, pure reasoning from first principles, that's much harder to fool. Sarah's grin widened. I don't know about that. Rodriguez is sharp. Real sharp. He's not going to miss a single footprint, a cigarette butt, or even a coffee stain. The guy has eyes like a hawk. I watched him spend 40 minutes examining a crime scene last month, and he found trace evidence that 3 other investigators had walked right past. He photographs everything, documents every detail, builds timelines down to the minute. That's modern police work, Marcus. Thorough, methodical, evidence-based. Marcus waved dismissively, though not unkindly. That's all well and good, like having a well-trained bird dog. A bird dog is excellent at what it does, and I would never disparage its abilities within its domain. But I wouldn't ask a bird dog to solve a chess problem, to understand human psychology, or to see through elaborate deception. Different tools for different problems. Come on, Marcus, Sarah protested, leaning forward in her chair. You're not seriously dismissing the value of physical evidence, are you? You can't solve crimes with pure philosophy. You need facts, concrete data. Not at all, Marcus replied calmly. Physical evidence has its place, and can be invaluable. The danger is when investigators give it too much importance, when they let it blind them to other possibilities. Most details are meaningless background noise. Only one or two actually matter, and identifying which ones matter requires understanding context, psychology, motive. It requires thinking about what makes sense as a complete picture, not just collecting puzzle pieces and hoping they'll arrange themselves. He tapped his forehead with one finger. It's the mind, the analytical thinking that solves cases. Our senses can deceive us. Evidence can be misleading or deliberately planted to mislead. We must look for truth through logic, not just observation. What makes sense given human nature? What's consistent with the patterns of behavior we understand? What explanation accounts for all the facts without requiring us to believe unlikely coincidences? Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical but also entertained. Are you seriously suggesting, Marcus, that you could solve a case without ever leaving this apartment? That you could sit here in your armchair, drinking your fancy hot chocolate, and solve a mystery that has a dozen experienced detectives stumped? That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Marcus said without hesitation. If the facts were presented to me accurately and completely, I could absolutely solve it from right here. I consider myself a consulting analyst. Bring me the data, give me the facts, and I'll tell you what they mean. I don't need to walk the crime scene. In fact, walking the crime scene might actually hinder my thinking because I'd be distracted by irrelevant details, by the emotional weight of the physical space. Sarah slapped her knee and laughed, a genuine sound of delight. All right, I'm calling you on that. This is too good to pass up. I bet you $50 you can't tell me where to find Jonathan Whitmore, dead or alive, within 1 week. 1 week from today, Marcus. If you can solve this case from your armchair, I'll pay up and admit that your methods are superior. But if you can't, you have to admit that maybe, just maybe, modern police work has some advantages over pure deduction. Marcus considered this for a moment, his eyes distant as he thought through the implications. Then he nodded slowly, reaching across to shake Sarah's hand. All right, I accept your wager. It's your American love of gambling and competition. Very well, let's make it interesting. Now give me the facts. Tell me everything you know about the Whitmore case, and please be as complete and accurate as possible. Don't interpret, don't theorize, just give me the raw information. Sarah pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her notes, which I knew she kept meticulously organized. She was more like Marcus than she probably wanted to admit. Okay, so here's what we know. Last Saturday, following his usual weekend routine, Jonathan Whitmore took the 12:40 train from Central Station to Riverside, where his estate, Willowbrook Manor, is located. This was completely normal for him. Every Saturday for the past 5 years, he's taken that same train. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing him board, and the conductor recognized him and remembered exchanging a few words about the weather. She continued, after arriving in Riverside around 1:30, he took his usual car service to the estate, about a 15-minute drive. He arrived home, had lunch with his wife in the conservatory. Nothing unusual in their conversation according to her statement. After lunch, around 3 o'clock, he walked around the property. It's a substantial estate, about 20 acres, with extensive gardens. He talked to the head groundskeeper about pruning some of the older trees, discussed the fall planting schedule, gave some instructions about repairing a section of the stone wall that borders the north side of the property. Everyone who saw him said he seemed completely normal. Nothing unusual about his behavior or mood. He was relaxed, friendly, spoke about plans for next spring's garden. Marcus was listening intently, his eyes half closed in concentration, already filing away every detail in that remarkable mind of his. "Go on," he said softly. After having tea around 4 o'clock, Sarah continued, he stopped by his wife's sitting room and told her he was going to walk down to the village to mail some letters. The village is about a mile from the estate, an easy walk that Widmore apparently enjoyed taking regularly. He mentioned to his wife that he was expecting a business associate named David Sterling to stop by around 5:30 for a brief meeting. If Sterling arrived before he got back from his walk, the staff was instructed to show him to the study and have him wait. Mrs. Widmore said this was all very casual and normal. Her husband seemed in good spirits. Sarah paused to take a sip of the coffee Marcus had poured for her. Widmore then left through the front door at approximately 4:15. The butler held the door for him and watched him walk down the long driveway. It's a tree-lined drive, very picturesque apparently. The butler watched until Widmore reached the main gate, saw him pass through it, and turn left toward the village, and that was it. Nobody's seen him since. That was 6 days ago, and despite a massive search effort, there hasn't been a single confirmed sighting. Marcus's eyes opened fully, and I could see the interest sparking there. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Please, continue with what happened next." About 15 minutes after Widmore left, at approximately 4:30, a tall man with dark features and a prominent black mustache showed up at the front door of the estate. The butler answered, and the man introduced himself as David Sterling and said he had an appointment with Mr. Widmore. The butler confirmed this was expected and, following Widmore's earlier instructions, showed Sterling to the study. The study is at the back of the house, overlooking the rose garden. It's where Widmore conducted most of his business when working from home. Sarah scrolled through more notes on her phone. Nearly an hour went by. Sterling waited in the study. According to the butler, he offered Sterling refreshments twice. Both times Sterling declined politely. At approximately 5:20, Widmore still hadn't returned. Finally, Sterling rang for the butler and explained he couldn't wait any longer because he had to catch his train back to the city. He seemed apologetic about it, not angry or suspicious, just disappointed that he'd wasted a trip. "What happened then?" Marcus asked. "Mrs. Widmore came down to apologize personally for her husband's absence, which she found completely baffling since She knew he'd been expecting this visitor, and it wasn't like him to be inconsiderate. She even offered to have their driver take Sterling to the station to make sure he didn't miss his train. Sterling accepted the offer, expressed his regrets about the missed meeting, and left. The driver confirmed dropping Sterling at Riverside Station at 5:40, and station cameras show Sterling boarding the 6:05 train back to the city. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. Well, as everyone knows by now, Widmore never came home. Mrs. Widmore started getting worried around 7 that evening, when it was getting dark, and he still wasn't back. She called his cell phone repeatedly, no answer. She had the staff search the grounds thinking maybe he'd fallen and injured himself. Nothing. By 9 o'clock she was seriously alarmed and called some of his friends and business associates. Nobody had heard from him. Early Sunday morning, at approximately 6 a.m., she contacted the police. Detective Rodriguez and his team responded immediately given Widmore's prominence. But they couldn't make any sense of it from the start. It was like he'd evaporated. Widmore hadn't been to the post office in the village. The postmaster knows him by sight, and is absolutely certain he never came in that day. Nobody in the village saw him pass through. The village is small enough that a man like Widmore, who's quite recognizable and well known in the area, would have been noticed. This is intriguing, Marcus said, steepling his fingers. It gets stranger, Sarah continued. The train station confirmed he hadn't bought a ticket or boarded any train. They have footage from the platform cameras covering the entire afternoon and evening. Widmore doesn't appear in any of it. His personal car was still in the garage at the estate. All 3 of his vehicles actually, all accounted for. The car service he uses keeps detailed logs, and they confirmed no pickups from the estate that afternoon except for Sterling's ride to the station. If he arranged for someone to pick him up somewhere along the road, Sarah said, you'd think by now, with a huge reward being offered, $50,000, the driver would have come forward. People don't typically pass up that kind of money to protect someone, especially not cab drivers or rideshare operators, who would have records of the trip anyway. True enough, Marcus murmured. Although that assumes the driver knows about the reward and isn't involved in whatever happened. But continue. There was a minor horse racing event at Oakfield, about 8 miles away from Riverside, Sarah continued. It's possible, theoretically, that he could have walked there and blended into the crowd to catch a train from that station instead. But that's a long walk, would have taken him at least 2.5 hours. And he would have had to walk along the main road for most of it. Plus, why would he do that? And since then, his photograph and description have been in every newspaper and on every news site in the country. I mean, his face has been everywhere. Not a single credible sighting. We've received hundreds of tips, of course. We always do in high-profile cases. But every single one has led nowhere. False sightings, mistaken identity, attention seekers, the usual noise. Sarah's expression grew more serious. Then on Monday morning, things got even stranger, and this is when Rodriguez really started thinking something criminal had happened. Behind a large painting in Whitmore's study, one of those expensive original oils worth a fortune itself, there's a wall safe. High-end model, supposedly very secure. That safe had been broken into and completely emptied. Not just opened, actually broken into with sophisticated tools. There are marks on the lock mechanism consistent with professional safe cracking. Marcus's eyes sharpened. Now that is interesting. Continue. The windows in the study were all locked from the inside when the staff checked on Monday morning, Sarah said. That seemed to rule out a typical break-in scenario unless someone inside the house locked them afterward to stage the scene. But the household staff have all been with the Whitmores for years, some of them for decades. They've been thoroughly vetted, and none of them have any financial problems or any apparent motive. Plus, all their alibis check out for Saturday afternoon and evening. On the other hand, Sarah continued, with Sunday in between and the household in complete chaos over Whitmore's disappearance, it's entirely possible the burglary happened on Saturday, possibly even before Whitmore left the house, and just wasn't discovered until Monday morning when the police were conducting their search. Mrs. Whitmore says she never goes into her husband's study. That was his private space, and she respected that boundary. So the safe could have been opened any time Saturday afternoon or evening, and nobody would have noticed until the police found it. Interesting, Marcus said dryly, drawing out the word. Very interesting indeed. So, has this sterling fellow been arrested? Sarah grinned. Not yet, but we're watching him very closely. He's under surveillance. Rodriguez has 2 detectives keeping tabs on him around the clock. Marcus nodded slowly. What was taken from the safe? Do you have a complete inventory? We've been going over that with Whitmore's junior partner, a guy named Philip Chun, and with Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah replied. Apparently there was a substantial amount in bearer bonds, negotiable instruments that are basically as good as cash. The exact amount is still being calculated, but it looks like somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million. There was also a large sum in actual cash, approximately $300,000, from a recent major transaction that hadn't been deposited yet. Sarah paused for emphasis. And there was also a significant amount of jewelry. This is the part that Mrs. Whitmore got very emotional about. All her valuable pieces were kept in that safe. Apparently her husband had developed quite a passion for buying her expensive jewelry over the past few years. According to her, it became almost an obsession with him. Hardly a month went by without him presenting her with some rare gem or piece. Diamond necklaces, emerald earrings, ruby bracelets, all high-end stuff from estate sales and specialty auctions. Quite a haul indeed, Marcus said thoughtfully, and I could see his mind already working on the implications. Now, what about this sterling character? What was his business with Whitmore that evening? What was this meeting supposed to be about? The two men apparently had a somewhat contentious relationship, Sarah explained. Sterling is a financial speculator, operates on a much smaller scale than Whitmore, but he's built a reputation as being very shrewd. Despite running what amounts to a boutique operation, he's managed to outmaneuver Whitmore a couple of times in the market over the past year. Made some contrarian bets that paid off big while Whitmore was on the other side of those trades. From what we can gather, it stung Whitmore's pride a bit. He wasn't used to being outsmarted, especially not by someone he considered a minor player. Did they have direct confrontations? Marcus asked. Not really, Sarah said. They rarely met face to face according to everyone we've interviewed. Most of their business was conducted through intermediaries, emails, lawyers. But the financial community is small enough that word gets around when someone like Sterling beats someone like Whitmore in a deal. This particular meeting on Saturday was about some South American investment shares, some kind of opportunity in Argentine agricultural futures. Sterling had apparently found something he thought might interest Whitmore, wanted to propose a partnership. Did Whitmore have extensive business interests in South America? Marcus asked, and I noticed he was taking mental notes, his eyes distant as he filed away information. I believe so, Sarah replied. Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that he spent several months in Buenos Aires last fall, from September through early December, if I remember correctly. He told her it was to explore investment opportunities and meet with potential clients in the region. He went alone, said it would be boring for her, lots of business dinners and meetings. She stayed home and was fine with that arrangement. Any problems in his personal life? Marcus asked. How was the marriage? Were they happy? By all accounts, the marriage was stable and uneventful, Sarah said. We've interviewed Mrs. Whitmore extensively, and she seems genuinely devastated by his disappearance. They'd been married for 23 years. No affairs that we can find evidence of on either side. No major conflicts. Mrs. Whitmore is pleasant but not particularly sharp, if you know what I mean. Kind of passive and traditional. She seems content to let her husband handle everything business-related, while she focuses on charity work and social obligations. I don't think we'll find our answer in marital problems. Then we won't, Marcus agreed. Did Whitmore have enemies? Anyone who might want him dead or disappeared? Plenty of business rivals, Sarah said. The financial world is cutthroat, and Whitmore played hardball. No doubt there are people he's beaten in deals who aren't fond of him, investors who lost money following his advice, competitors he elbowed out of opportunities, but nobody who seemed likely to resort to violence or kidnapping. We've been through his files, his emails, looking for threats. Nothing concrete. The usual angry letters that someone in his position gets, but nothing that rises to the level of a serious threat. And even if someone did decide to kill him, I interjected, where's the body? You can't just make a body disappear, especially not in a populated area like Riverside. Exactly, Sarah said, nodding at me. As you said earlier, bodies have a way of turning up. We've had search teams combing the entire area. Helicopters with thermal imaging, search dogs, divers, and all the local water bodies. Nothing. It's like he walked out his front gate and ceased to exist. Actually, there's one more thing, Sarah added, looking back at her notes. One of the groundskeepers, a man who's worked at the estate for 15 years, reported seeing a figure walking around the side of the house toward the rose garden on Saturday afternoon. This would have been around 4:30 or so, maybe a bit later. He was working on the other side of the property and saw someone from a distance. There's a set of French doors from the study that open directly onto the garden, and Widmore often used that entrance when he was working in his study. He preferred it to walking through the house. Could the groundskeeper identify who it was? Marcus asked. No, Sarah replied. He was working quite a distance away, maybe 200 yards, and only saw the figure peripherally while he was focused on his work. Couldn't say for certain whether it was Widmore or someone else. Average height and build, dark clothing. That's all he could tell us. He also couldn't pinpoint the exact time except that it had to be before 6 because that's when the groundskeepers finished their shift, and he knows he saw the figure before he packed up his tools. What's beyond the rose garden? Marcus asked, and I could tell this detail had caught his attention. A lake, Sarah replied. More of a large pond, really, but they call it a lake. It's been there since the estate was built in the 1920s. Very picturesque, surrounded by willow trees. And there's a boathouse at one end. A couple of small boats are kept there, rowboats mainly, and a canoe. The family uses them in the summer sometimes. Sarah looked at Marcus knowingly. I suppose you're thinking suicide? That maybe Widmore walked down to the lake and drowned himself? Well, Detective Rodriguez is planning to have that lake completely dragged tomorrow morning. He's bringing in a specialized team with sonar equipment. That's the thorough kind of investigator he is. No stone unturned, no possibility unexplored. Marcus smiled faintly and turned to me. Could you hand me today's newspaper? I believe there's a clear photograph of Widmore in the Metro section, probably on page 3 or 4. I found the paper on Marcus's side table, where he kept his daily reading material neatly folded, and located the article. The photograph was indeed clear, a professional headshot that had probably been taken for some business publication. I passed it to Marcus. Marcus studied the photo intently for nearly a full minute, his eyes moving across every detail of Widmore's face. He murmured. Long wavy hair, silver at the temples, full mustache and beard, both well-groomed, heavy eyebrows, dark eyes that looked quite intelligent. Is this accurate to how he looked last Saturday? That's right, Sarah confirmed. Recent photo too, taken within the past 6 months. Hair and beard are starting to go gray, but he keeps them well maintained. Vain about his appearance according to people who know him. Always dressed impeccably, never a hair out of place. Marcus nodded slowly, still studying the photograph. Well, Lieutenant, what do you make of all this? Pretty straightforward case, isn't it? Man leaves house, gets abducted or decides to run away. Safe gets robbed either by him or by an opportunistic burglar who took advantage of the chaos. Find the man, and you solve the mystery. On the contrary, Marcus replied, setting down the photograph with care. It's quite obscure. Very obscure indeed. Sarah looked pleased with this response. Well, that gives me confidence we'll crack it. Rodriguez will crack it, I should say. If it's got you puzzled, that means it's a tough one. Actually, Marcus said with a slight smile, I find it encouraging when a case appears obscure. When something seems crystal clear from the start, when all the evidence points in one obvious direction, I tend to suspect someone has artificially made it appear that way. The human mind seeks patterns and narrative coherence. Sometimes criminals exploit this by creating a false pattern, a misleading narrative that seems to explain everything neatly. The obscure cases are often more honest in a way. The confusion itself is genuine rather than manufactured. Sarah shook her head, smiling. Well, to each their own methodology. But there's something to be said for having a clear path forward, for following the evidence where it leads. That's what Rodriguez will do. Start with Sterling since he's the obvious person of interest. Verify his alibi, search for connections between him and Whitmore that might suggest motive, follow the forensic evidence from the safe. I don't see a clear path yet, Marcus murmured. I need to close my eyes and think. Let the information settle and arrange itself according to logical principles. Sarah sighed good-naturedly. Well, you've got a whole week to think. I'll keep you updated on any new developments. All the hard work from dedicated investigators like Rodriguez will provide you with more data to analyze from your comfortable armchair. That's part of our arrangement, Marcus agreed. But remember, you're not to interpret the data for me. Just give me facts as they emerge. As I walked Sarah to the door a few minutes later after she'd finished her coffee, she whispered to me with a grin, Feels almost unfair, doesn't it? Like taking candy from a kid. Poor Marcus, I almost feel bad. But $50 is $50. I had to agree with a smile, though I'd known Marcus long enough to never underestimate him. When I came back into the living room, Marcus was staring at me with an amused expression, clearly having heard Sarah's whispered comment despite her attempt at discretion. "Go ahead," he said, his finger raised in that professorial gesture. "You think old Marcus has lost his edge, don't you? You don't trust my analytical abilities. You think I'm being arrogant, taking a bet I can't win. Don't look embarrassed, my friend. Let's discuss this interesting little problem. It's incomplete, I admit. The information we have so far is fragmentary. but it's already showing some intriguing aspects that others might overlook. The lake, I said meaningfully, unable to help myself from speculating. And more specifically, the boathouse. If I were going to stage a disappearance, or if I'd killed someone and needed to hide the body temporarily, a boathouse would be perfect. Dark, rarely used this time of year, accessible but isolated. I glanced at Marcus. He was smiling in that mysterious way of his, the expression that meant he'd already thought 3 steps ahead of everyone else and was waiting for us to catch up. I knew it would be useless to press him further at that moment. He would reveal his thinking when he was ready and not before. We didn't hear from Sarah until the following evening when she showed up around 9 o'clock. I'd been having dinner with Marcus, a quiet meal of roasted chicken and vegetables that he'd prepared with his characteristic precision, and we'd just finished clearing the dishes when we heard her rapid knock on the door. I answered it, and immediately saw from her expression that she had major news. Her eyes were bright with excitement, and she was slightly breathless, as if she'd run up the stairs. "Hey, Marcus," she said as she came into the living room, practically vibrating with energy. "Things are moving fast. Big developments today. But don't tell me you predicted we'd find Whitmore's body in that lake, because we didn't find a body." Marcus raised an eyebrow and gestured for her to sit. He poured her a glass of water from the pitcher he always kept on the side table. "Oh," he said calmly. "No body? Then what did you find?" "We didn't find his body," Sarah said, taking a grateful sip of water, "but we found his clothes. The exact outfit he was wearing that day when he left the house. The butler gave us a detailed description, and Mrs. Whitmore confirmed it. Gray slacks, white dress shirt, navy blue cardigan sweater, brown leather shoes. All of it was at the bottom of the lake, weighted down with rocks that had been stuffed into the pockets." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Were any other clothes missing from the house?" "No," Sarah replied. "His personal assistant checked thoroughly. She went through his entire closet, his dresser, everything. The rest of his wardrobe is completely intact. Everything accounted for. Which means he changed into something else before the clothes ended up in the lake, or he's somewhere without any clothes, which seems unlikely. But there's more," Sarah continued. "Much more. We've arrested David Sterling, one of the housekeepers, a woman named Maria who's been with the family for 12 years, and who closes all the bedroom windows every evening. Swears she saw Sterling walking toward the study through the rose garden at approximately 5:45 on Saturday afternoon. That would be about 10 minutes before he claimed to have left the house to catch his train." "What does Sterling say about that?" Marcus asked, his tone carefully neutral. Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "At first, he denied ever leaving the study. Said he waited there the entire time, never moved from the chair except to look at some books on Whitmore's shelves. But when we told him we had an eyewitness who saw him outside, he changed his story. Said he'd forgotten, that he just stepped outside briefly through the French doors to examine an unusual rose variety in the garden. He claims he's interested in horticulture and couldn't resist taking a quick look. Pretty weak excuse, I commented. That's what Rodriguez thought, Sarah agreed. But here's the really damning evidence, the piece that convinced Rodriguez to make the arrest. Jonathan Whitmore always wore a distinctive thick gold ring with a solitaire diamond on his right pinky finger. Always. Multiple people confirmed he never took it off, had worn it every single day for at least a decade. It was custom-made for him in Italy, and worth about $30,000. She paused for dramatic effect. That ring was pawned in the city on Saturday night by a guy named Tommy Vickers. Small-time criminal, known to the police. He did 90 days last fall for pickpocketing. Basically a street-level petty criminal, nothing violent in his history, just theft and occasional drunk and disorderly. How did you connect the ring to Vickers? Marcus asked. The pawn shop owner recognized the ring from the photos we'd circulated, Sarah explained. He'd been suspicious when Vickers tried to pawn it, because it was clearly expensive, and Vickers is clearly not a man of means. But Vickers had identification, and there's no law against pawning your own jewelry. So the shop owner took it and gave Vickers $2,000 for it, which is absurdly low for that ring, but Vickers apparently didn't know its value or was too desperate for cash to negotiate. What happened after Vickers got the money? I asked. He got gloriously drunk, Sarah said with a slight smile. Went to 3 different bars, spent most of the $2,000 on drinks for himself and random people. Then around 11 that night, completely intoxicated, he got into a fight with a police officer on patrol. Not a serious fight, just drunk and belligerent. The officer arrested him for assault on a peace officer, drunk and disorderly, resisting arrest. He's been in custody ever since, slept it off in a cell, and has been waiting for arraignment. Sarah continued, I went downtown with Rodriguez yesterday to interview Vickers. He's sober now, and let me tell you, we definitely scared him. Rodriguez hinted pretty strongly that he might be looking at a murder charge, being an accessory to murder at minimum. Vickers looked like he was going to pass out from fear. And what's his story? Marcus asked with great interest. Here's his account, and honestly it's bizarre enough that part of me thinks it might actually be true, Sarah said. He claims he was at the Oakfield races on Saturday afternoon, though Rodriguez suspects he was working the crowd as a pickpocket more than actually betting on horses. Apparently he had a bad day, lost what little money he had or didn't manage to steal anything worth stealing. Around 4:30 or 5, he started walking back toward the city. It's a long walk, but he does it sometimes when he's broke, can't afford the train. She pulled out her phone to reference her notes. He was walking along Route 47, the main road that connects Oakfield to Riverside and eventually to the city. About a mile outside of Riverside, He got tired and sat down to rest in a drainage ditch beside the road. These drainage ditches are pretty deep, 4 or 5 feet, so if you're sitting in one you're largely hidden from the road. Vickers says he was catching his breath, maybe dozing a little, when he heard footsteps approaching. "Go on," Marcus said, his attention completely focused. He looked up and saw a man walking down the road toward Riverside. Dark complexion, prominent black mustache, expensive-looking dark suit. Vickers describes him as a city businessman type, not the kind of person you usually see walking along that rural road. Vickers stayed quiet in the ditch, partially hidden behind some construction materials that were stored there. He didn't want to be seen because he thought the man might be someone who could identify him from his pickpocketing. Just as the man got close to where Vickers was hiding, Sarah continued, the guy looked both ways down the road very carefully, almost theatrically according to Vickers. Seeing that the road appeared completely empty, no cars coming in either direction, no other pedestrians, the man reached into his pocket, pulled something small out, and threw it over the roadside fence into the field beyond. The object made a clinking sound when it hit, metal on stone, which immediately got Vickers curious. Here's a well-dressed businessman throwing away something metal, and apparently valuable enough to get rid of it discreetly. So as soon as the man continued walking toward Riverside and was out of sight, Vickers climbed out of the ditch, went over the fence, and started searching. Took him maybe 10 minutes, but he found the ring in the grass near a pile of stones. That's Vickers' complete account, Sarah concluded. He claims he had no idea whose ring it was. No idea there was any connection to Whitmore's disappearance because at that point on Saturday evening Whitmore hadn't even been reported missing yet. Vickers thought he'd just gotten lucky, found an expensive ring that some businessman had thrown away for reasons he couldn't understand and didn't care about. So he took it into the city that night and pawned it. To be fair, Sarah added, Sterling completely denies this story. Says he's never seen Vickers before in his life, has no idea how Vickers got the ring. Suggests that maybe Vickers encountered Whitmore on that road and robbed him, possibly killed him. Sterling's lawyer is already building a defense based on the unreliability of Vickers as a witness. Marcus sat quietly for a long moment, his fingers steepled together. Then he said, I suppose it's within the realm of possibility that Vickers encountered Whitmore on that road, robbed him of the ring, and murdered him to avoid identification. What does Rodriguez think? Rodriguez is keeping an open mind, Sarah said, but he leans towards Sterling being involved. The timeline works. Sterling was at the estate, had access to the study, was seen in the rose garden shortly before claiming to leave. He had means and opportunity. Marcus shook his head slowly. I find it highly improbable that Vickers murdered Whitmore, for several logical reasons. First, he would have had no means of disposing of the body. It's been 6 days, and no body has appeared despite extensive searches. A street criminal like Vickers wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to hide a body that effectively. Second, the extremely careless and open way in which he pawned the ring makes it very unlikely that he committed murder to obtain it. A murderer would be paranoid, cautious, would probably have left the city entirely, or at minimum, would have waited weeks before trying to convert the ring to cash. He continued, third, your average petty thief, someone like Vickers, is rarely a murderer. The psychological profile is entirely different. Pickpockets and small-time thieves are non-confrontational by nature. They avoid violence. Murder requires a very different mentality. Fourth, as Sarah pointed out, Vickers has been in police custody since Saturday night. It would be an extraordinary coincidence that he, sitting in a jail cell with no access to outside information, could give such an accurate and detailed description of Sterling, a man he supposedly has never met, unless he actually did see Sterling on that road. Sarah nodded slowly. You might be right. Rodriguez actually agrees with most of that analysis. But here's what puzzles me. What puzzles both of us actually. Why wouldn't Sterling have found a cleverer way to dispose of the ring? He's supposed to be intelligent, a sophisticated financial operator. Why throw it away on a public road where anyone might find it? Marcus shrugged his shoulders slightly. Well, if it had been found in that general area by a random person, one could argue that Whitmore himself had dropped it during his walk, lost it accidentally. It wouldn't necessarily point to foul play. In fact, finding it might even support the theory that Whitmore had gone for a walk in that direction. But I agree it seems careless for someone supposedly intelligent. But why take the ring off a body at all? I interjected, confused by the whole scenario. If you've killed someone and hidden the body, why bother removing a ring? It just creates additional evidence, additional risk. There might actually be a practical reason for that, Sarah said, her expression becoming serious. Rodriguez had the same question and did some research. You know what's just past that lake, beyond a small gate in the property fence? About a 3-minute walk through some woods? What? Marcus and I both asked simultaneously. An abandoned industrial lime kiln, Sarah said. It hasn't been operational in probably 40 years, but the structure is still there, and local kids apparently used to dare each other to go inside before the county finally fenced it off about 5 years ago. But the fence isn't that secure. Someone could definitely get through it with some effort. I felt a chill run through me. Good God, I said. You mean that lime, if a body were burned in lime, it would destroy the body, but wouldn't affect the metal of a gold ring? Exactly, Sarah confirmed grimly. Rodriguez looked into it. Quicklime or calcium oxide, which is what would be in a lime kiln, can destroy organic material, flesh and bone, relatively quickly under the right conditions. But metal, especially gold and diamonds, would be completely unaffected. If you were trying to dispose of a body using lime, you'd definitely want to remove any metal jewelry first because it would remain intact and could identify the victim. It seems to me, I said slowly, that this explains the whole thing. What a horrifying crime. Sterling must have killed Whitmore somehow, probably in the study or nearby. He used the boathouse to temporarily hide the body. Then later that evening he moved it to the lime kiln. He removed the ring first, but then got nervous carrying it, and threw it away on his walk back to the train station. Sarah and I both turned to look at Marcus simultaneously, expecting him to agree with this theory or at least comment on it. He seemed lost in thought, his brow furrowed as if engaged in some intense mental calculation. I felt certain his brilliant mind was finally engaging with all the puzzle pieces, fitting them together in a unique way he had. What profound insight would he share? We didn't have to wait long, though his first words were completely unexpected. With a small sigh, as if returning from some distant mental place, his expression of concentration relaxed. He turned to Sarah and asked in a casual tone, "Do you happen to know, Lieutenant, whether Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore shared a bedroom? Were they still sleeping in the same room, or had they moved to separate bedrooms at some point?" The question was so absurdly irrelevant to everything we'd been discussing that Sarah and I just stared at him in stunned silence. Of all the details to focus on, of all the questions to ask, this seemed like the least important. We'd been talking about murder, about bodies dissolved in lime, about sophisticated criminal schemes, and Marcus wanted to know about sleeping arrangements. After a long pause, Sarah burst out laughing, though not unkindly. "Good Lord, Marcus, I thought you were about to say something profound. As for your question, I honestly have no idea. I suppose I could find out, but is it really important? Does it actually matter to solving this case? Could you find out?" Marcus asked with that unusual persistence he sometimes displayed about seemingly minor details, the tone that suggested he knew something nobody else did. "Please, if it's not too much trouble. I would consider it quite valuable information." "Sure," Sarah said, clearly humoring him, still confused about why this mattered. "If you really want to know, I can ask Mrs. Whitmore tomorrow when we interview her again. She probably won't think it strange. People ask all kinds of questions during investigations." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Marcus said sincerely. "I would appreciate it if you could make that a priority. It may seem like an odd detail, but I assure you it could be quite significant." Sarah stared at him for another moment, searching his face for some hint of what he was thinking, but Marcus had already drifted back into his thoughts, his eyes distant again. She shook her head slowly, caught my eye, and whispered, "Poor guy. The stress might really be getting to him. Maybe retirement has left him with too much time to overthink things." She quietly gathered her things and left the apartment with promises to update Marcus on any further developments. As the door closed behind her, I heard her footsteps descending the stairs, gradually fading away. Marcus remained seated in his armchair, apparently lost in contemplation, staring at nothing in particular. Since he seemed disinclined to talk, I grabbed a notepad from the side table and started writing down what I considered the key points of the case. It helped me think to organize information visually, to see patterns and connections. Marcus's voice brought me back to attention after perhaps 20 minutes of silence. He'd snapped out of his reverie and looked alert again, his gray eyes focused and sharp. "What are you working on there, my friend?" he asked with interest. "I was just noting what I think are the crucial facts in this case," I replied, holding up the notepad. "Trying to make sense of everything Sarah told us, organize it logically." "How methodical of you," Marcus said with approval in his tone. I felt a small surge of pride. Marcus rarely offered compliments casually, so when he did, they meant something. "Want me to read them to you?" I asked. "Maybe you can tell me if I'm on the right track?" "Please do," he said, settling back in his chair and steepling his fingers in that characteristic pose. I cleared my throat and began reading from my notes. First, all the physical evidence points to David Sterling as the person who broke into Widmore's safe. He was on the premises at the right time, he had access to the study, and there's an eyewitness who saw him in the rose garden when he claimed to be inside the entire time. Second, I continued, he had a clear motive, a grudge against Widmore. They were business rivals, and Sterling had beaten Widmore in some deals, which probably created bad blood between them. Maybe Widmore threatened him somehow, or Sterling wanted revenge for some slight. Third, Sterling lied in his initial statement when he claimed he never left the study. We have a reliable witness who saw him outside. That lie suggests consciousness of guilt, that he's hiding something. Fourth, I said, looking up to gauge Marcus's reaction, if we believe Tommy Vickers' account, and I'm inclined to sense it so specific and detailed, Sterling is clearly implicated in the disappearance. He was seen throwing away Widmore's ring, which suggests he had access to Widmore's body. I paused dramatically. "Well?" I asked, feeling I'd identified all the vital elements of the case. "What do you think? Am I missing anything obvious?" Marcus looked at me with something like pity, though his expression was gentle. He shook his head slowly, almost sadly. "My friend," he said softly, "you lack the gift for recognizing truly important details. You've assembled facts, certainly, but you haven't understood them. Also, I must tell you, your logical reasoning is fundamentally flawed in several respects." I felt slightly offended, but also intensely curious. "How so?" I asked, leaning forward. "What am I missing?" "Let me address your 4 points systematically," Marcus said, shifting into his teaching mode, the tone he used when he wanted to illustrate a principle. "First, you claim that all evidence points to Sterling as the person who broke into the safe. But consider this question. How could Sterling possibly have known he would get an opportunity to break into that safe? He came to the estate for a scheduled business meeting about Argentine investment shares. He had no way of knowing in advance that Widmore would leave the house to mail letters, leaving him completely alone in the study." Marcus continued, He couldn't have predicted that Whitmore would be absent for an extended period. For all Sterling knew, Whitmore would return within 10 minutes, or Mrs. Whitmore might come to the study to check on him, or a servant might enter. Breaking into a safe requires time, concentration, and the right tools. It's not something you do opportunistically on the chance you might have a few unsupervised minutes. But he might have seized an unexpected opportunity, I suggested, though my confidence was wavering. Maybe he came prepared with tools just in case? And the tools themselves? Marcus asked pointedly. Businessmen don't carry safe-cracking equipment to meetings on the off chance they might need it. Professional safe-cracking tools are specialized, bulky, suspicious if found during any kind of search. And you can't open a high-end modern safe, the kind a man like Whitmore would certainly have, with improvised tools or a letter opener. It requires expertise and proper equipment. Beyond reasonable doubt, Sterling did not break into that safe. I nodded slowly, seeing his point. Okay, what about my second point? The motive? Ah yes, Marcus said, a slight smile playing at his lips. You claim Sterling had a grudge against Whitmore because he had outmaneuvered him in business deals. But think about this logically. What exactly does that mean? Sterling engaged in financial transactions, presumably entered into voluntarily, with a view to benefiting himself. He succeeded and profited. Whitmore was on the losing side of those trades. Now, Marcus continued, in general, do you hold a grudge against someone you've beaten in a competition? Someone you've outsmarted and profited from? No, typically you feel satisfied, perhaps even magnanimous toward them. It's the loser who holds the grudge, not the winner. If anyone harbored resentment from those business dealings, it would have been Whitmore toward Sterling, not the reverse. Your logic about motive is exactly backward. I felt my theory crumbling but pressed on. Well, you can't argue with the third point. Sterling definitely lied about leaving the study. We have an eyewitness. That proves he's hiding something. True, he lied, Marcus conceded, but consider why he might have lied. Perhaps simple fear. Remember the context. When he was first interviewed by police, they had just discovered that the missing man's clothes were found in the lake. Sterling knew he was on the property when Whitmore disappeared. He knew how that looked. In a moment of panic, he might have lied reflexively, trying to minimize his connection to events, even if he had nothing to do with any crime. Marcus leaned forward. Of course, honesty would have served him better. Lying to police almost always makes things worse. But fear clouds judgment, makes people make stupid decisions. A lie doesn't necessarily indicate guilt of the crime being investigated. It might just indicate fear of being falsely accused. And the fourth point? I asked, though I was beginning to see where this was going. Surely Vickers' testimony is damning? Yes, Marcus agreed. If Vickers is telling the truth, Sterling is undeniably connected to events somehow. That's what makes this case genuinely intriguing rather than straightforward. But connected how? In what capacity? That's the question that needs answering. So I did identify one crucial fact at least? I asked hopefully. Perhaps, Marcus replied diplomatically, but you completely overlooked the two most significant elements, the only two details that truly matter, the ones that undoubtedly contain the key to this entire mystery. I was almost afraid to ask. And those are? Marcus's eyes gleamed with that special intensity he got when he was onto something. First, Jonathan Whitmore's growing obsession with purchasing expensive jewelry for his wife over recent years. According to Sarah, this had become almost a compulsion, hardly a month passing without a new acquisition. Why? What drove this behavior? That's the first key question. He paused for effect. Second, and equally important, his extended 3-month trip to Buenos Aires last autumn, from September to December. 3 months away from home on vague business purposes. What was he actually doing there? That's the second key question. Marcus, you can't be serious, I protested. Those are the most important details. More important than the safe being robbed, or the clothes in the lake, or the ring being thrown away. How can buying jewelry and taking a business trip possibly be the keys to solving a disappearance and possible murder? I'm completely serious, Marcus said calmly. More serious than I've been about anything in quite some time. This is absurd, I thought to myself. Marcus had finally lost his analytical edge, was seeing patterns that didn't exist, was overthinking the case into incomprehensibility. The answer was obviously that Sterling had killed Whitmore, probably in a confrontation that got out of hand, and had tried to cover it up. All this talk about jewelry and Buenos Aires was just Marcus being stubborn, refusing to accept the obvious solution. But I didn't say any of this out loud. I'd known Marcus long enough to know that arguing with him when he was in this mode was pointless. He would reveal his thinking when he was ready. The next morning proved that Sarah had taken Marcus's strange request seriously despite her skepticism. A text message arrived for Marcus around 11 o'clock while we were having coffee. At his request, I pulled out my phone and read it aloud. The message said, "Asked Mrs. Whitmore about bedroom arrangements. She confirmed that she and her husband have occupied separate bedrooms since last winter, approximately February. She said he claimed he developed insomnia and didn't want to disturb her sleep with his restlessness. Anything else you need?" "Ah!" Marcus exclaimed loudly, startling me with his sudden excitement. "Perfect. And now it's late summer, approximately 6 months of separate sleeping arrangements. Now everything is clear, absolutely everything." I stared at him in complete confusion. What's clear? How does that possibly help? Marcus was beaming, looking more satisfied than I'd seen him in months. "Tell me, my friend," he asked, "do you have any money invested with Whitmore and Associates? Any retirement funds or savings accounts with that firm?" "No," I said, bewildered by the question. Why would I? I'm not in their client demographic. Why are you asking? Good, Marcus said. Because if you did, I would strongly advise withdrawing every penny immediately, today if possible. In fact, you should probably warn anyone you know who does have money with that firm. Why? I demanded. What are you expecting? What does bedroom arrangements have to do with investment accounts? I expect a major financial collapse of Whitmore and Associates within the next 48 hours, Marcus said with complete certainty. Possibly sooner, possibly as early as tomorrow morning. The firm is almost certainly a massive fraud, and it's about to come crashing down spectacularly. You've lost your mind, I said, though not unkindly. We're talking about one of the most respected investment firms in the country. They manage billions. They've been in business for decades. And you think they're a fraud based on bedroom arrangements and a jewelry collection? Watch and see, Marcus said calmly. Which reminds me, we should return the favor to our good lieutenant. He pulled out his phone and started typing a message. I watched over his shoulder as he wrote. Lieutenant Chen, I strongly advise immediate withdrawal of any personal funds you or anyone you know has deposited with Whitmore and Associates. Time is of the essence. This is not a joke. He hit send and smiled at me. That will certainly puzzle her thoroughly. Her eyes will go wide when she reads it. She won't understand it all, will probably think I've had some kind of mental break. But she'll understand tomorrow or the day after. I remain deeply skeptical. Marcus, I said carefully, I think maybe you're seeing connections that aren't there. Sometimes the obvious answer is the correct answer. Sterling probably killed Whitmore in a confrontation, panicked, hid the body, and is now trying to cover it up. That explains everything we know. We'll see, Marcus said, still smiling. We'll see very soon. The following morning proved Marcus's remarkable abilities beyond any shadow of doubt, and I would spend years afterward trying to understand how he'd seen what no one else could see. I woke up early and turned on the news while making coffee, expecting the usual morning programming. Instead, every channel was carrying the same breaking news story with dramatic banner headlines. Whitmore and Associates collapses in massive fraud scandal. Billions missing in Ponzi scheme. FBI raids Whitmore offices. Calls it largest financial fraud in decade. I stood frozen in my kitchen, coffee forgotten, watching in stunned disbelief as news anchors breathlessly reported the details. Federal regulators had apparently been conducting a secret investigation for months. Overnight, they'd moved to seize all of Whitmore and Associates' assets and records. The firm was completely insolvent. Client funds totaling billions of dollars had been systematically stolen over years, used to pay fake returns to earlier investors in a classic Ponzi scheme. According to the FBI spokesperson giving a press conference, Jonathan Whitmore had been running the fraud for at least 5 years, possibly longer. He'd used the firm's legitimate business as a front while siphoning off vast sums of money. When the scheme became unsustainable, when too many clients wanted to withdraw funds that didn't actually exist, he'd apparently staged his own disappearance. I grabbed my phone and rushed to Marcus's apartment, not even bothering to shower or change. I found him calmly reading the newspaper at his breakfast table, that infuriating knowing smile on his face. "How?" I demanded breathlessly. "How did you know? How could you possibly have known this was coming?" He gestured for me to sit, and poured me a cup of coffee with steady hands. "It was really quite obvious once you looked at the right details," he said mildly. We were barely through breakfast. I was still demanding explanations and Marcus was still maddeningly calm, when the door burst open without any knock. Sarah rushed in, completely disheveled and out of breath. In her left hand was her phone showing news coverage. In her right was a printed copy of Marcus's text message from yesterday, which she practically threw on the table in front of him. "How did you know, Marcus?" she demanded, her voice somewhere between amazement and anger. "How could you possibly have known? The FBI says they've been investigating this for 6 months in complete secrecy. Federal regulators only moved last night. How did you figure it out from your armchair in one evening?" Marcus smiled calmly at her, taking a deliberate sip of his hot chocolate before responding. "Ah, Lieutenant," he said finally, "after your text message yesterday about the bedroom arrangements, it became a certainty, the final piece of the puzzle. But really, from the very beginning, from the first facts you presented, the answer was there for anyone who knew how to look. Stop being cryptic and explain," Sarah demanded, dropping into a chair. "Very well," Marcus said, settling back with the satisfied air of a professor about to deliver a lecture. "Let me take you through my reasoning step by step. You see, from the beginning, several things struck me as peculiar about this case. The first was the safe burglary itself. Think about it carefully. What was taken? Jewelry, cash, bearer bonds. All items that are valuable, yes, but also all items that are portable and essentially untraceable. Now," Marcus continued, "if an outside burglar had broken into that safe, what would they take? Probably the jewelry, since it's most valuable and easiest to fence. Maybe the bearer bonds if they were sophisticated enough. But would they take everything? Would they know to take the bonds? Would they care about the exact amount of cash? No, an opportunistic burglar would grab what was obviously valuable and run." He leaned forward. "But everything was taken, methodically cleaned out. That suggests someone who knew exactly what was in there, and wanted all of it. Who would know the complete contents of that safe? Only Whitmore himself. Therefore, the burglary was staged by Whitmore for his own benefit. He was stealing his own possessions, or rather, securing them for later use." "Okay," Sarah said slowly. "That makes some sense. But how does that connect to financial fraud?" "Patience," Marcus said. "Then there was the jewelry itself. Widmore's growing obsession with purchasing expensive gems for his wife. On the surface, this seems like the behavior of a devoted husband. But think about it economically. Jewelry is one of the few assets that holds substantial value in a small, portable form. It's also relatively easy to sell discreetly, especially if you replace the original pieces with convincing fakes, which is remarkably easy to do nowadays with modern synthetic gems. Marcus's eyes gleamed. What if Widmore wasn't buying jewelry out of devotion, but out of necessity? What if he was systematically converting embezzled funds into portable, concealable wealth? Buy an expensive necklace, give it to his wife, she wears it to events and keeps it in the safe. Everyone sees it. It appears legitimate. But then quietly replace it with a fake and sell the real one under a false identity, or simply keep the real one hidden away for future use. That's actually brilliant, I said, seeing it now. No one would question a wealthy man buying gifts for his wife. Exactly, Marcus said. Over several years, you could convert millions of dollars into a jewelry collection that fits in a briefcase. Then comes the Buenos Aires trip. 3 months in South America, supposedly for business. But what if he wasn't there for investment opportunities? What if he was there creating a new identity, establishing financial accounts under a false name, setting up the infrastructure for a new life? South American countries have banking secrecy laws, Sarah said, understanding dawning on her face. And Buenos Aires is sophisticated enough that a wealthy American wouldn't stand out. Precisely, Marcus confirmed. So now we have a man who's been embezzling funds, converting them to portable wealth, and preparing a foreign escape plan. This tells us he knew the fraud would eventually collapse, that discovery was inevitable. He was building an exit strategy. Then comes his staged disappearance, Marcus continued. He creates the perfect mystery, the impossible disappearance. He walks out of his house and vanishes. His clothes are found in the lake, suggesting suicide or murder. The safe is robbed, suggesting an outside criminal. He's given investigators multiple directions to look, multiple theories to chase, while the real answer remains hidden. But where is he? I asked. If this was all planned, where did he actually go? Marcus smiled. That's where the bedroom detail becomes crucial. You see, maintaining a disguise, living as a different person, is extremely difficult if you're in intimate contact with someone who knows you well. A wife who sleeps in the same bed, who sees you first thing in the morning, who would notice any inconsistency. That's why Widmore needed separate bedrooms. He needed privacy to maintain whatever deception he was planning. I still don't understand, Sarah said. Where is he now? Marcus stood and walked to his window, looking out at the street below. My friends, he said, if I were hiding from the police, if I were Jonathan Widmore trying to disappear while everyone searched for me, do you know where I would hide? Do you know the one place no investigator would ever think to look? Where? We both asked. In police custody, Marcus said, turning back to face us with that triumphant smile. In a jail cell, already arrested, already processed into the system as someone else entirely. What? Sarah and I said simultaneously. Think about it, Marcus said. You're searching for Jonathan Whitmore in order to arrest him and put him in prison. So it would never occur to you to check if he might already be there, already locked up but under a different name. It's the perfect hiding place because it exploits your own assumptions about what you're looking for. You're saying Whitmore is Tommy Vickers? I asked, my mind reeling. The pickpocket who pawned the ring? Exactly, Marcus said. You mentioned that Mrs. Whitmore isn't particularly perceptive, that she's somewhat passive and not very sharp. Nevertheless, I believe if you took her to the jail right now and had her meet with Tommy Vickers, she would recognize him immediately. She would recognize her husband despite the fact that he shaved off his distinctive beard and mustache, trimmed those bushy eyebrows, cut his long hair short, and is dressed in jail clothes instead of expensive suits. A wife almost always knows her husband, Marcus continued, even when everyone else is fooled by a disguise. Even when the rest of the world sees only a petty criminal, a wife sees the man she's lived with for 23 years. Sarah was shaking her head in disbelief. But Tommy Vickers has a criminal record. We fingerprinted him. He's in the system. We have his prior conviction from last fall. Exactly, Marcus said with emphasis. Don't you see? That's the brilliant part. Whitmore didn't create this identity recently. He prepared it long in advance, with meticulous care. He wasn't in Buenos Aires last autumn, like he told his wife. Or rather, he might have been there briefly, but he spent a significant portion of that time here, in this country, deliberately creating the false identity of Tommy Vickers. He actually went to jail? I asked, incredulous. He deliberately got himself arrested and served time? Why not? Marcus asked. He was playing for enormous stakes, both a vast fortune and his freedom. It was worth doing thoroughly, worth investing months of preparation. Think about it. Serve 90 days for some minor crime under your false identity. Let yourself be fingerprinted and photographed. Establish a complete criminal record. Then when you need that identity later, it's completely bulletproof. The police have your prints and photo on file as Tommy Vickers. No one would ever suspect that Tommy Vickers, convicted pickpocket, is actually Jonathan Whitmore, respected financier. Marcus began pacing, warming to his explanation. The only problem was maintaining the disguise afterward, after supposedly returning from Buenos Aires. He had to wear a false beard and hairpiece to appear as himself, as Whitmore, in his daily life. But sleeping in a fake beard is extremely uncomfortable and risks detection. What if it shifted during the night? What if his wife noticed something wrong? He couldn't take that chance. So he convinced her they should sleep separately, Sarah said quietly. Claimed he had insomnia. Yes. Marcus confirmed. You discovered for me that for the past 6 months, ever since his supposed return from Buenos Aires, he and Mrs. Whitmore have had separate bedrooms. That's when I knew for certain. That single detail confirmed everything because it answered the question of how he could maintain the disguise while still living at home. The pieces were falling into place in my mind now. The groundskeeper who thought he saw his employer walking around the house toward the rose garden was absolutely correct, I said. It was Whitmore. He went to the boathouse, where he'd carefully hidden his vicar's disguise and different clothes. He changed, dumped his Whitmore clothes in the lake weighted with rocks, and walked away as Tommy Vickers. Precisely, Marcus said. Then he executed his plan perfectly. He deliberately pawned the ring in an obvious, clumsy manner to establish his vicar's identity as being in possession of Whitmore's property. Then he picked a fight with a police officer and got himself arrested, landing safely in a jail cell where absolutely no one would think to look for a missing millionaire. He's been there for 6 days now, perfectly hidden in plain sight. But wait, I said, trying to find a flaw. What about David Sterling? Where does he fit in? Why did Whitmore arrange that meeting? Ah, Marcus said with a smile. Sterling was a patsy, an unwitting accomplice. Whitmore needed someone at the estate that afternoon who could be blamed for the safe burglary, someone who had a plausible motive. Sterling had beaten Whitmore in business deals. There was bad blood between them, at least from Whitmore's perspective, if not Sterling's. So Whitmore arranged a meeting, knowing Sterling would be shown to the study where the safe was located. Whitmore probably drilled a hole in the safe himself earlier, Marcus continued, then left his staff with instructions to show Sterling to the study. While Sterling waited there innocently, Whitmore was transforming himself into Vickers. Then later, after Whitmore had vanished, investigators would find the broken safe and immediately suspect Sterling. The man had means, opportunity, and apparent motive. Perfect scapegoat. And Vickers throwing away the ring? Sarah asked. How does that fit? Whitmore needed to establish a connection between his vicar's identity and his Whitmore identity without making it obvious, Marcus explained. If Vickers simply had the ring when arrested, it might seem too convenient, too suspicious. But if Vickers had a story about finding it, about seeing it thrown away by a mysterious man matching Sterling's description, then it serves two purposes. It explains how Vickers got the ring naturally, and it further incriminates Sterling. Very clever, really. I sat back, absolutely stunned. The entire plan was breathtakingly audacious. Create a false identity months in advance, complete with criminal record. Embezzle millions while converting it to portable assets. Stage an impossible disappearance that creates multiple false trails. Frame an innocent man as a scapegoat. Then hide in the last place anyone would look, a jail cell. Sarah was already on her phone. I need to call Rodriguez, she said. We need to get Mrs. Whitmore down to the jail immediately for an identification. Wait, Marcus said, holding up a hand. There's one more thing you should know. Once Mrs. Whitmore identifies Vickers as her husband, once that becomes public, you can expect some very significant additional revelations about the extent of the fraud. Whitmore won't have done this alone. There will be accomplices at the firm, people who helped hide the fraud, falsify records. This is going to get much bigger before it's over. He was right, of course. Over the following weeks, as the investigation unfolded, 7 other people at Whitmore and associates were arrested for their roles in the fraud. The total amount stolen exceeded $4 billion. It was indeed the largest financial fraud case in a decade. The next day, a check arrived in the mail for Marcus, Sarah's payment of their $50 bet. Marcus opened it, and the check fluttered onto his breakfast table. He looked at it with a troubled expression, his usual satisfaction at being right noticeably absent. "Oh dear," he said softly. "What should I do with this? I feel terrible taking Sarah's money. She was operating in good faith, making an honest wager. This feels like I took advantage of her." He thought for a moment, then his expression brightened. "I have an idea," he said. "We'll have a nice dinner. The 3 of us might treat. That makes me feel better about it. This case was really too easy once you saw the correct pattern. I'm almost embarrassed. It's like I took advantage of a child." "Marcus, my friend," I said, still somewhat in awe of what I'd witnessed, "what's so funny?" "You're laughing to yourself." He looked at me with genuine amusement. "I was just thinking," he said, "about how many investigators are probably kicking themselves right now. They had Whitmore in custody for 6 days. They walked past his cell, processed his paperwork, transported him to court. He was right there the entire time, hidden in the most obvious place possible. And nobody saw him, because nobody was looking for a millionaire in a jail cell." "Sometimes," Marcus continued, his expression becoming more thoughtful, "the hardest thing to see is what's right in front of us. We have expectations about how reality works, assumptions about categories and boundaries. A wealthy businessman can't also be a criminal in jail. Those are different categories in our minds, separate boxes. But reality doesn't respect our mental categories. The brilliant criminal understands this and exploits our rigid thinking." He stood and walked to his window again, looking out at the city. "The best hiding place," he said quietly, "is always in plain sight. Not despite the fact that everyone is looking, but because everyone is looking. When you're looking for something, you develop a mental image of what you're seeking. And if reality doesn't match that image, you look right past it even when it's directly in front of you." "That's what Whitmore understood," Marcus continued. "He understood that no one looks for a millionaire in a jail cell, because those concepts don't go together in our minds. He exploited that blind spot in human perception. Very clever, really. Despicable and criminal, certainly, but undeniably clever. I joined him at the window, and we stood there in silence for a moment, watching the city go about its business below. ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary deceptions that sometimes unfold around them. "Marcus," I said finally, "how did you know about the financial fraud? About the Ponzi scheme? That wasn't just logic from the facts Sarah gave us. You specifically predicted the firm would collapse." He smiled. "That was extrapolation based on pattern recognition," he said. "The jewelry purchases, the foreign trip, the elaborate disappearance plan, all suggested someone preparing to flee from something. What would make a wealthy, established businessman abandon his entire life? Not a simple crime of passion, not ordinary financial trouble. It had to be something enormous, something that would destroy him completely if discovered." "Given his profession," Marcus continued, "the most likely scenario was financial fraud on a massive scale. Ponzi schemes always eventually collapse when new investment dries up or too many people want withdrawals. The schemer always knows this day is coming, and the smart ones prepare escape plans. Everything about Whitmore's behavior fit that pattern perfectly." "So you didn't know for certain," I said. "You made an educated guess." "A highly educated guess," Marcus corrected with a smile. "Based on decades of observing human behavior and pattern recognition. But yes, there was an element of probability rather than certainty. I could have been wrong. He might have been fleeing from different trouble entirely. But I wasn't wrong, as it turned out." "You rarely are," I said. "Not rarely enough," Marcus replied with uncharacteristic modesty. "I make mistakes like anyone else. I've been wrong many times over the years. The difference is I try to learn from errors, to refine my thinking. And I'm willing to consider possibilities that seem unlikely or that violate conventional assumptions." Over the following days, the Whitmore case dominated the news. The story had everything: wealth, deception, fraud, a brilliant criminal scheme. Mrs. Whitmore had indeed identified Tommy Vickers as her husband the moment she saw him, breaking down in tears at the recognition. Whitmore, realizing the game was up, had eventually confessed to everything, perhaps hoping cooperation would reduce his eventual sentence. The FBI recovered some of the stolen money, though billions remained unaccounted for, presumably hidden in various foreign accounts and investments under false names that Whitmore refused to reveal. He was charged with dozens of counts of fraud, embezzlement, and other financial crimes. His victims numbered in the thousands, people who trusted him with their retirement savings and life savings. Sarah visited us a few days later, looking exhausted but satisfied. The case had been a massive success for her, and for Detective Rodriguez, who'd been publicly praised for solving such a complex disappearance. Of course, Sarah made sure to credit Marcus privately, though at his insistence she didn't mention his role publicly. "You won the bet fair and square," she said to Marcus, settling into her usual chair in his apartment. "I should have known better than to doubt you. But I still don't fully understand how you saw it. The bedroom detail, the jewelry, the Buenos Aires trip. They seem so small compared to all the other evidence. That's exactly why they mattered, Marcus explained. Everyone else was focused on the dramatic elements. The disappearance, the lake, the boathouse, the safe burglary, the ring. All the obvious, attention-grabbing details. But those were all theater, all staged to misdirect. The small details, the ones that seemed irrelevant, those were the ones Whitmore couldn't fully control or hide because they were part of his necessary preparation. He needed separate bedrooms to maintain his disguise, Marcus continued. He needed to convert assets to portable form, hence the jewelry. He needed to create a false identity, hence the extended absence from home. These weren't theatrical. These were practical necessities. And precisely because they were necessary rather than staged, they revealed the truth. I'll remember that, Sarah said. Look for what's necessary rather than what's dramatic. We did have that celebratory dinner, the three of us, at a quiet restaurant Marcus favored. Sarah regaled us with stories from the investigation, details that hadn't made it into the news. Marcus listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, always curious about human behavior and motivation. As we were finishing dessert, Sarah raised her glass in a toast. To Marcus Holloway, she said, the man who can solve impossible cases from his armchair. To thinking clearly, Marcus corrected, raising his own glass. To questioning assumptions. To looking beyond the obvious. To remembering that truth often hides in plain sight. We clinked glasses and drank. And there you have it, friends. A mystery that proves beyond any doubt that the most brilliant hiding place is often right under everyone's nose. Sometimes the answer we're desperately searching for in distant places is actually sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone clever enough and brave enough to truly see it. Jonathan Whitmore is now serving 35 years in federal prison, ironically in the very same institution where he once hid as Tommy Vickers. His case has been studied in criminal justice programs as an example of how assumptions can blind investigators to obvious truths. The victims of his fraud recovered approximately 40% of their stolen money through asset seizures and insurance, though many lost their life savings entirely. It was a painful reminder that trust, once given, can be weaponized by those without conscience. As for Marcus, he continued his quiet life, solving occasional cases from his armchair when they interested him, always insisting he was retired but never quite able to resist a good puzzle. And I continued to marvel at his ability to see what others missed, to think in ways that seemed almost alien yet were purely logical once explained. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another tale. I'd still love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? And honestly, do you think you would have figured out where Whitmore was hiding? Let me know your thoughts. Do you think you could have connected those small details the way Marcus did? Until next time, keep questioning everything you see. Keep looking beyond the obvious. And remember that sometimes reality is far stranger and more cleverly constructed than it first appears. The truth is out there, friends, but it's not always where you expect to find it. Sometimes the best hiding place is right in front of your eyes. Good night, everyone, and sweet dreams. May your own mysteries, whatever they may be, reveal themselves to you when you learn to see what's actually there rather than what you expect to be there.